Hey everyone, this is Bunny. Today we are going to learn to paint wood. Remember, we're doing this simply, easily, so that you can paint wood at home and not have to spend a lot of time and not be too finicky. So while there are really complicated ways to paint wood and make it look really realistic, that's not what we're doing here. Okay, what we're doing here is very, very basic. So to start off, you need something that is supposed to look like wood, and you need to prime it. Don't try to paint on bare plastic or bare metal. It's not going to go well. So get your piece primed, wait until that primer is cured, follow the directions on your primer. If it says it needs 7 days to cure on plastic, it needs 7 days to cure on plastic. Next, we're going to pick a color. We need to pick a base color for the wood. Now this should be lighter than you want your final product. So if you look here, I've got this light umber color. Okay, it's actually really, really pretty. It's like a milk chocolate almost, because I added a little white to it. So I want this lighter color. It's a really pretty color that I will use for something else as well. However, the point here is to make sure your color is lighter than your final desired color. Okay, because if your final desired color is going to be a darker brown, we're going to put a wash on top of this. So one of the problems with picking a color that we like right at the beginning for our wood is we end up way too dark because we need to put a wash on here later to sink into these recesses. So pick a color lighter than you intend. And when you are painting, yes, you want to go this direction to get some paint off your brush. But if finally you need to run with the grain of the wood, because if all I do is run this way, my brush is going to end up skipping over some of those grooves. And it is really important that I get all of the paint I need in those grooves. So yes, go this way, but also go up and down. So go all directions, but your final strokes should be with the groove of the primary direction of the groove anyway. Sometimes you have groove that's running in more than one direction, and that's okay. But just try to get in that direction, because then you will have a better product. Now obviously I can't paint this entire thing because my fingers are going to be in the way, but I am going to flip it over in a sec. I'm going to paint both sides of it. Flip it this way. Now we're going to paint this side. There we go. But yes, we want a lighter color than we actually need. So think about that one before you start. Because if you don't think about it before you start, you're going to get to the end and go, ooh, that's dark. And you don't want super dark. Or you probably don't want super dark. Maybe you do. If you want a super dark wood, that's fine. But I don't. I want kind of a medium color for that wood. There we go. So now we are just going to let that dry, and we will come back when it's thoroughly dry so we can paint the rest of it. All right, so that is looking pretty dry. Let us just turn that and paint the other side. Paint all of the stuff your base color before you go on. Don't try to work half and half. I know some people try to do that. It generally doesn't work out well. You generally don't want to be working on this half trying to get it to look the way you want and then work that half. You generally want both halves ready for your washes and your dry brushing all at the same time. Here we go. So generally just get all of that painted nicely. Don't forget your edges. Okay. Doot, 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 doot. Just keep painting it. I find painting relaxing. I know a lot of people find a little bit stressful to try to get their stuff ready. I find it works out a lot better if you just don't worry about it. Just paint. Just paint. Get those little bits off of there. There we go. Just, if you have planks like that where there's holes, just go through and scrape away the excess. There we go. Now we're just going to sit that down, let it dry, and then we'll come back and do a little bit more and not just applying brown. All right, our wood is completely dry. You'll notice I used a fairly light color. Remember, wood can be a lot of different colors. You could use a basic white for a birch. You could use any variety of maple. You could do redwoods, green. There's really no limit, especially if you're working in a fantasy setting. The wood can really be any color you like, but always go a little bit lighter than you want your final product. So now is the time to look at your wood and see if there's any not wood on it. So in my case, there's little nails. So I'm going to just take a gray and just tap those nails. You want to get these nails, but you might have things like moss, or maybe you have door handles. If you're painting doors, you can have all different kinds of things that will have different colors. So this is a good time to do that. Even though you're primarily working with wood and you're primarily painting wood, if there's anything on there that's not exactly wood, this is the time to paint them. So I'm just going to go through and give these guys, I'm not giving them much contrast because I don't want them super bright. I'm just giving them a very dull gray, basically just a little tap of color. Okay, just a little tap. They don't need much, just a little tap of color. I don't want them to stand out. But you might have bits and bobs on your wood that you do want to stand out, and this is an excellent time to highlight those. But if you don't want them to stand out, use kind of a complementary color that almost blends, but don't use an identical color. We want something that just highlights these guys just a little bit, just so that they're not all the same background color. And don't forget to check both sides of your wood. Now in my case, there's nothing on the bottom. I don't have any kind of nails or anything on the bottom, but it's good to check. Just give that a quick check. Give all your little bits and bobs a quick bit of color. Again, I'm just using a very flat gray and only a very little bit of it. I don't want these to stand out. I just want them to be there, but not really noticeable. I just want them not to quite blend in. So we just want those nails to just be a slightly different color. Now here's where you have to make sure you let it dry completely. If you do not let this dry completely, the next stage is going to basically destroy all your work. So let that dry completely before you keep going. All right, our little dabs of gray for our nails have dried. I've brought out this piece as well, which is similar, done in the same colors, but this one had some raised areas that I decided were probably mossy. So I have added a little bit of green to this one. This one's still fairly smooth. I'm not going to worry about deciding there's moss somewhere. I'm just going to move right on to washing. So for washing them, we're turning them upside down. Start on the bottom. And what I'm going to do is use a black wash. Now you can use any color wash you want. Basically the point of the wash is to sink down into all these crevices. So you go over top and it really darkens up your wood. Now, depending on the color that you want, the look you want at the very end, you might change the color of your wash. So I'm using black because I want these to look really worn, really old, really dirty. I don't want them to look fresh and clean. These are for a swamp set that I'm painting, and they do need to look like they're worn, like they're gross, like they have mud on them, like they have moss on them. So I am using a black just to sink into those recesses and give us some really neat details. So you can use an umber or a sepia if you want something a little more subtle. I don't want subtle. I want this dark color, this black, to really show up, to really show how dirty and gross all this wood is. So with your washes, remember, a wash is just a really watered down paint, and it just allows it to sink into all these crevices, kind of gives us that detail we're looking for. Don't miss any spots. Remember, it will dry, and you are looking just to make sure that all of these little recesses get covered. You don't want any spots, like you don't want to leave this because that doesn't look good. You want all of it to look similarly dirty. Now you can apply extra wash in some areas, so I'm applying more wash along the edges, along these support pieces, because I want them to look even darker, like there's more stuff collected in there, but I'm still not missing any spots. I'm still making sure all my spots are covered, but I am making sure there's a little extra wash along these supports because I want them even darker. Now this is the underside, so you won't see this very often when you're playing with these pieces, but it is still nice that the detail is there. I know some people don't bother adding washes to the underside of their pieces, mostly because they don't ever turn them over. But I like to add the detail because what if I do turn them over? What if I do decide that in the scenario we're playing, a sea monster came up and overturned everything? If a sea monster comes up and overturns everything, these might end up upside down. And if they look like this on one side, but like this on the other, then it really just kind of takes you out of the moment because it just doesn't look right. But remember, you can use any color wash you wanted. I'm using black. You don't have to use black. And again, you might have used a different color for your actual wood. I used a rather chocolate color because I knew I was going to use black. So think about the colors before you start. Know what color wash you're going to use because the wash changes the look. So if I had used a darker color, this black wouldn't show up as much. But it does show up pretty well, mostly, because I used a nice light chocolate. So this makes it just look more realistic. Remember, we're not going for hyper-realism here. We're just going for something that makes you happy. Okay, we're going to let this side dry, and then we will come back, flip it over, and do the top side. All right, they seem to be dry, so you can already see the difference between that side and that side. This side looks okay. This side has a lot more definition. So we're just going to turn them over, and we're just going to add more wash to the other side of these. Okay, which will allow us to really see all that wood grain coming out. Again, you can use different color washes. So I considered using a green wash here to kind of be mossy, but then I decided I don't need to do that. So you can apply more than one color, but I am just applying the black because that's all the fuss I want to do. I tend not to fuss too much with wood because ultimately it tends not to be the centerpiece of your story when you're playing. So you really can kind of just make it look half decent and then worry about everything else later. Because this, you don't need it to be too fancy. Focus on your characters and let your scenery like this, where your characters are just going to be standing on it most of the time, just kind of exist. Now, when we get over to this piece, we have some moss. Here you can decide if you want to dry brush that moss. I'm literally going over it with my wash because I want to darken that up too. But you can decide if you would rather do something else. So if you'd want to skip that, maybe you want to do a lighter color wash on it. Maybe you want to go over the moss with a dry brush later. You can do that too. So you just kind of have to take a look at what you've got and what kind of suits your purpose, because what you're using your pieces for might not be what I'm using mine for. Mine, I want them quite darkened, and I want all of this to kind of look a little bit like dirt, like it's been walked on a lot. There we go. And then we're going to let that dry, come back and see if there's anything else we'd like to do. You really can't judge it until you're completely done. You keep going until you're satisfied with the result. If at any point you're simply happy with the way it is, you can stop, seal it, call it a day. But if you're not happy with the way it's looking, you can certainly go back, use another wash, add a little more paint, whatever you need to do to make it what you're hoping for it to be. Remember, these are for yourself, right? They have to be what makes you happy. So these we're just going to let dry. Then we'll come back as soon as that is done and see if we'd like to do something else. Well, there we have it. They are dry, And that is what they look like. Now, if you wanted to get even more realistic, you could take a dry brush and kind of dry brush where you think people might have walked on these. Or if you have somewhere you want to highlight, you could do that. But ultimately, if it's just wood and it's not a big centerpiece, that's all I would do. In fact, that is all I'm going to do. They look good. They'll look nice in my scenery. Mostly these are bridges in a swamp, so a little bit of moss here and there isn't hurting anything. But they'll look good in the scene I'm setting. I'm happy with the way they look. Again, I could do a fancier job, and if I was painting for other people, they would get a bunch of highlights and all that kind of thing. But just for me, I'm not going to bother. We don't need to put that much effort in. We don't need to take that much time. We don't need to fuss that much over some planks of wood. So work on them until you're happy. Play with your washes until you're satisfied with the way your wood looks. But ultimately, don't get too caught up in it, because all that matters is that you like the way they look and that they'll work well in the campaign you're running. Nothing else really matters. Don't get bogged down in something as simple as a piece of wood. Focus more on your characters, those miniatures that are going to be front and center in so many campaigns. Don't focus on a little piece of scenery that might only be there for one night, and then you put it back in a box and you don't use it again till the next campaign. Don't fuss the small stuff. So I hope you did learn to paint wood here and learned not to worry about it too much. So just remember, don't get too caught up in the small details. Just do what you intend to do. Move on to something more worth your time, because a little piece of scenery just isn't worth it. That's about it for us today. I hope you'll be back with us next time. Bye!